but in general, spirited worship, what I call spirited worship, has a number of distinguishing characteristics. So I'm going to hand out two. So let me tell you a little bit about what I mean when I say this, what it looks like when I do this in my congregation. The first thing that makes spirited worship what it is that it is story-driven. So in Keith's workshop next door, we were talking specifically about children's books. This could be a book, but what I often do is take a folk tale. There's a fabulous book that used to be sold through the Skinner House bookstore, or the Beacon Press UUA bookstore, called Doorways to the Soul. It's a collection of folk tales from around the world, most of them 2 paragraphs, and then there are discussion questions. So when I say story-driven, I don't necessarily mean a specific bound book. The worship service I'll be leading here at 4 o'clock is a Chinese folk tale. Well, I do have a story for you today, but I'm not the only one telling it. So before we begin the tale, which is good news, bad news, I need your help, because you are going to be the villagers in our story. And here is how you will know what to say and when to say it. I have 2 signs here, and when I hold up the happy sign, you are going to respond to really good news by saying, wow, how terrific, that's great, I just can't believe it, aren't we lucky? And if I hold up the sad sign, you are going to moan and lament the very bad news you heard. Right. So just to practice, here we go. Do you know I found out that tonight for dinner, the only thing we're eating is ice cream? Right. But it's terrific. But then I found out that someone left the freezer unplugged last night, and so it all melted, so there's in fact nothing for dinner. That's right. Very nice, very nice. Good. Now that you know how to play your role, we are going to begin our story, which is based on a Chinese folk tale. And if there are people who come to life next to you, just know that they'll take care in our gallivanting. Well, once there was a farmer, and the farmer owned a beautiful horse. He loved this horse. He took care of it so well. And in fact, the horse was widely admired, and the people of his village, when passing by, would often stop just to gaze at it. Well, one afternoon, the farmer had taken his horse out into the fields, and he didn't fully close the gate to the corral. And that evening, as the farmer went to bed and the moon rose up over the pasture, the horse found the open gate and ran away quickly towards the forest into the far-reaching trees. And the next morning, the sun came up over the empty corral, and the villagers walking past noticed that it was empty, and word quickly spread among the farmer's neighbors that the farmer's beloved horse had escaped. But you know, the farmer said,
maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. It's too soon to tell you.
Well, the villagers were certain that the horse is never going to return, and that the farmer was being stubbornly stupid for not accepting that fact. And days passed until one afternoon at dusk, the farmer's horse emerged from the forest, trotting back to the corral, and the villagers were stunned to see that a herd of wild horses was following the farmer's horse. And all of the horses found their way into the corral and to the trough of food waiting there, and word quickly spread among the villagers of this turn of events, and that the farmer was now lucky enough to have all of these horses. And the farmer just said,
maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. It's too soon to tell you.
well, the farmer enjoyed watching this herd of horses in his corral, and his grown son enjoyed them even more. The son had been watching these horses, and one of the horses in particular, a gray beauty with a white blaze down her forehead, a beautiful horse who looked as if she could run as fast as the wind, fascinated the son. And one day, he approached the wild horse and decided to break her and train her to ride with him on her back. And that afternoon, as he tried to ride her, the horse threw the son, and he landed heavily, breaking both of his legs. And the farmer again said to his neighbors,
maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. It's too soon to tell you.
well, the neighbors helped the son back into the home to heal. And the neighbors were still clucking and about the son's broken legs and how terrible the accident was, when from the distance the thundering of more horse hooves could be heard entering the village. And this time it was not a herd of wild horses, it was the emperor's messenger and the troops riding down the valley, armor gleaming in the sun. And as the troops went from farm to farm, they announced the news of a war in the far edges of the country, a large war effort that needed every able-bodied young man. The troops went from house to house, gathering men to join the army, and when they reached the farmer's house, they found his injured son and left him behind, excusing him from being conscripted because his legs were still healing. And so even as they mourned the departure of their healthy sons, the neighbors came to celebrate with the farmer that his son was safe from being sent to the war. Thank you. The farmer has sat down because this is a story without end. The farmer's story really has no end because we can imagine it going on and on and on. All of our lives are visited by joys and sorrows, and some of them are greater than others, but there's no end to the highs and lows that we go through. And most of the joys and sorrows that come into our lives are surprises. You never know when a joy or sorrow will drop into your life. And we know that even the happy surprises can turn your life upside down. They can make our lives feel very, very full all of a sudden. And sometimes people call these curveballs. So one question we might start with is, how do we know which surprises to welcome? And how do we know which ones to fight against? Let me remark on this a bit more. My first experience of intergenerational worship before I became a minister was of taking the story time in a service and stretching it out, and then taking the sermon time and just kind of really condensing it. And I'm talking about moving away from that model where we just kind of lengthen the story and still go through the segments of worship and take a story and make it arc. I call it the liturgical arc, so that the situation or the characters are introduced very early, and then we might do part of the story and then pause for the welcome and greeting and chalice lighting. And then we pick up the story again, and then we might pause and step back and have the joys and sorrows. And then we pick up the story again, tell another segment, pause, do the offering. So that and there's different ways to do it, but sometimes you really can begin the service once upon a time and end the benediction with, and so too may we carry these lessons into our life. So that's what liturgical arc means. It means we're not just stretching open the story, which there's nothing wrong with that, but if you have a very rich, deep story, it can actually be told over a long period of time.